During this morning's community coaching call, we went deep into the Fruitarian muscle building strategy. Okay, so we covered why carbohydrates is the primary driver of muscle growth, and the role that insulin plays and the role that glucose plays in not only retaining lean mass, but building lean mass in the most effective way possible with the least amount of downside. So we went into the mechanisms of how it works, and then we went into what the diet plan looks like, right? Or the dietary guidelines to follow in order to get the results that you're looking for. So we do this multiple times a week, every week, where we dive into a topic. This could be muscle growth, where we go over diet. This could be training. We go over different exercises, training strategy, what the training plan looks like. We go over mindset and self-development. We talk about how to improve your metabolic health, your hormonal health, all this different type of stuff. So if this is the type of information that you see a good value in, you really want to get into the community, definitely hit the link in the description of this video. But as for now, before you really do anything, watch the replay. One of the things that I want to get better at doing this year is really tying in the connection between fitness and just overall health and wellness, right? Because the pursuit of, building strength and muscle and dropping body fat and things like that is not really a separate and distinct thing from improving your overall health and wellness, right? People typically treat fitness as a separate thing from like your general health and wellness journey. And the truth of the matter is fitness really should be incorporated directly in, okay? Trying to build muscle and, trying to drop body fat and things like this and improve your metabolic health. This is something that should really take center stage, whether you're trying to improve your gut microbiome, whether you're trying to reverse diabetes, blood pressure, fatty liver disease, kidney disease, cancer, autoimmune disease. Doesn't really particularly matter, right? This is not something that we can really afford to overlook. Muscle mass is a vital organ, okay? It isn't some accessory thing that we don't necessarily have to build, or it's just some recreational thing that bodybuilders do sometime. That's not what this is. Muscle mass is a vital organ. Muscle mass is so important to the point where if you lose muscle mass, or as you lose muscle mass, every other metric in your health can decline as well. All right. I'm saying that as a general rule because if you have built lean mass up to a super physiological level, it's a bit different. I'm talking about in general, right? The more lean mass you lose, the worse your health outcomes become. Right? Not to scare anybody and worry about losing muscle mass or something like this, because your lean mass will fluctuate up and down slightly whether you're trying to build or lose or whatever the case is, right? So I'm just saying generally, more broadly speaking. Most of your year should actually be geared towards improving or increasing your lean mass, right? So, for example, there are 4 quarters in a year. Each quarter is 3 months. Typically, what it looks like annually is you would take 12 weeks to really cut down on a decent amount of body fat, and then you would spend the rest of the year, the remaining 3 quarters, on improving strength and building lean mass. This is how it works out on average for most people. There are exceptions to this, but that's a general rule, right? Or at least how I format the year. Of course, now this is going to change because if you have an excessive level of body fat, let's say you have, I don't know, 100 plus pounds or something like that to lose, that's a different story. And you would put more of your focus on improving your metabolic health to make it easier to drop body fat. You would probably have 12 weeks out of the year where you more aggressively lean into dropping body fat. And in the remainder of the year, the other 3 quarters, you wouldn't be as aggressive. You would probably take somewhere around a more of a conservative approach to dropping body fat. And there are some hormonal implications as to why you would want to do that, right? You can't just go full steam ahead all year long trying to maximize fat reduction because that comes at a cost. Okay. It is very difficult to maximize fat loss as well as, muscle retention or muscle growth simultaneously. It's a sliding scale, right? The more you lean into one aspect, the more you lean away from the other, right? And so becoming a larger person or increasing your lean mass runs counter to dropping fat mass. The more you lean into building lean mass, the more you lean away from dropping fat mass. Okay, it's typically how this works. You can strike a balance between the two where you can drop body fat and build muscle mass at the same time, but this is going to be more of a conservative approach. All right. So this leads me to, as far as nutrition is concerned, carbohydrates are the primary driver of muscle growth. You don't really hear people often say this. There's always a focus on protein consumption, which is, it's almost a bit agitating for me, right? Because it's just not true. Protein is actually a very marginal component to the human diet. The only reason why there's such an emphasis on protein consumption to build lean mass and to drop body fat, which is pretty interesting because the mainstream consensus is, hey, if you want to drop body fat, you got to increase your protein intake. And then also, if you want to build more lean mass and gain weight, you got to eat more protein. So it's like, well, how is it the same for both? Right? When you understand how the human metabolism works, you understand why it can't be the same answer for both. All right? For carbohydrates, it kind of works for both, not really, but kind of, right? And I'll explain why. But for the sake of this conversation, it's really going to be geared towards building muscle mass. Carbohydrates are the primary driver of muscle growth, more so for hormonal reasons, okay? For metabolic reasons also, but the hormonal implications are a big deal. There are 2 primary hormones that really drive muscle growth. Number 1 is insulin, number 2 is testosterone. And I place insulin above testosterone, and the reason why is because insulin determines your testosterone level. All right. In the mainstream consensus in fitness, it's, insulin, you want to try to bring your insulin down, bring your insulin down, bring your insulin down, right? Bring blood sugar down, bring blood sugar down, bring it down, bring it down, bring it down. Insulin does bring blood sugar down, okay? So people will often talk about this topic and conflate insulin and blood sugar. So people will use the term insulin spike and blood sugar spike interchangeably. These are not necessarily the same things. They're very separate and distinct things. Blood sugar spikes can actually be very beneficial because blood sugar spikes lead to insulin spikes, and insulin spikes is where the magic happens. So when you eat carbohydrates, the carbohydrates break down into glucose, right? And that glucose basically gets shuttled into your lean mass via insulin. Insulin acts as a transportation mechanism. That glucose is the fuel that powers everything in your body. Okay, without that glucose, basically you drop dead. You fall into a diabetic coma, you pass away. The thing that uses the most glucose, probably not the most glucose, but the most glucose relative to its size is your brain. So your brain uses around 20 to 25% of all the glucose that you consume in a day. Okay, the brain is a mega supercomputer. All right, it's not just your brain, it's also your nervous system. Okay, all of your motor neurons, every aspect of your nervous system uses that glucose along with your brain. Okay, me getting on this stream right now and explaining all this type of stuff is going to cause me to actually use more glucose than I would if I wasn't explaining this, because I'm using a tremendous amount of natural computing power in my brain in order to speak, in order to engage in the cognition needed in order to clearly explain these processes. All right, so glucose is vitally important. Your body is always going to find a way to come up with the glucose needed to pay the bills, the brain bills, so to speak, right? So even if you cut all of the sugar and the carbs and everything out of your diet, your body will just use something else and convert that into glucose. It's kind of like if you get fired from your job, you no longer have money coming into your checking account. What happens is you will pull from your savings account. You will pull from your investment portfolio or your 401k, or you will sell things that you own in order to come up with the cash. You will do what you need to do in order to come up with the cash needed in order to pay your bills. The human body works exactly the same way. So there's no real benefit to cutting your carbohydrate intake and replacing it with fat and protein and all of this type of stuff, because carbohydrates is like paying for things with your debit card or your credit card. Okay, fast, easy, simple swipe. Fat is like paying for things with money out of your savings account. There's no swiping of a card. You actually have to go into your savings account, then transfer that money over into your checking account in order to be able to use it. That's what using fat for energy is like. Using protein for energy is even more difficult, because protein isn't really an energy source. Protein is needed in order to build new cells, in order to build enzymes and hormones and things like this. Protein is not really an energy source. It's not supposed to be used that way. In order for your body to use protein as an energy source, you would have to break down and disassemble those proteins and then use the carbon and hydrogen structures in order to use that for energy. Basically breaking down protein and converting it into glucose via gluconeogenesis. Okay, this is catabolism. This is typically a thing we don't necessarily want. Okay, so you hear a lot of talk about, well, you got to eat 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight in order to really adequately build muscle mass and all of this type of stuff. If you look at that in a diet plan, and if you were to actually follow that as a diet plan, the math doesn't check out. You would have to sacrifice a tremendous amount of things in order to do that. This is going to require you to consume a very high level of saturated fat and cholesterol, which really cut into your insulin sensitivity and really start to increase insulin resistance, right? So you really destroy your metabolism as a result when you do this. Okay. So this is a lot of steak and eggs and fish and chicken and all of this type of stuff, which is going to put a real strain on your kidneys over time and lead to liver complications. Okay. This also leads to you smelling bad because of all the sulfur and whatnot, and all of the uric acid and the ammonia and the lactic acid and all of this type of stuff. This stuff doesn't smell very good. All right. So you get a little halitosis going on when you have this excessive level of protein. And then, of course, with the excess nitrogen and hydrogen, you get some really ridiculous gas, bloating, crazy flatulence. Your farts smell real bad, all this type of stuff, right? Essentially, this would make you into a damn near a biohazard. Brutal stuff. Right? It's just not plausible in your diet. So this brings us back around to carbohydrates, okay? The body doesn't store protein. Not really. Okay? So if you eat a ton of protein, it doesn't matter how much protein you eat. It matters how much protein your body uses and what your body uses it for. Also, it's very important to take into account there's only really 3 amino acids that directly build muscle mass. This is isoleucine, leucine, and valine. The overwhelming majority of the protein that you do consume is not those 3 branched chain amino acids. It's actually a whole variety of other different amino acids. Okay? So if our goal is to really maximize muscle growth, we only really need an adequate amount of isoleucine, leucine, and valine. Okay? All the other amino acids are important for building up certain vital organs, producing certain enzymes and neurotransmitters and things like that, right? But we don't need really large amounts of these things. Okay. So when you cut your carbs and replace that with protein, your body's basically going to take that excess protein and convert it into glucose anyway, because that's the #1 priority for the human body. It's not protein. It's glucose. Now, the trade is the more carbohydrates you cut, you need to increase your protein intake if you cut carbs, because your body needs to make up for the lack of adequate glycogen storage from the limitation of carbs. So if you bring the carbs down, you necessarily have to increase the protein intake in order to compensate for the lack of glucose being stored inside the muscle tissue as glycogen. However, if you reduce the protein intake and increase the carbohydrates actually inhibit the breakdown of protein. So increasing your carbohydrate consumption actually protects your lean mass. It prevents the degradation of lean mass. Now, if you reduce the dietary fat and the protein and really have the majority of your energy and your food coming from carbohydrates, not only does this do a phenomenal job of protecting your lean mass, okay, and this is bone mass included, muscle and bone mass, it preserves those structures, right? This also puts your body in more of an anabolic state, meaning your body is more geared towards building lean mass because you create this anabolic environment. Anabolic meaning build up, right? Your body's going to be more prone to building up that lean mass, to building up that bone density when you really have that adequate abundance of carbs, right? Because you get an abundance of that glucose that you can use to store in those cells as glycogen. So now doing that leads us to a greater level of lean mass preservation and a higher propensity for lean mass increases. And you don't smell terrible for doing it. Now, of course, not all carbohydrate sources are made equally. The best form of carbohydrates is fruit. Fruit is easy to digest. It's already a hydrated food. You don't have to break it down and put it under all types of heat in order to make it edible. Fruit is a naturally edible food. You don't really have to do anything to it. It's the best carbohydrate source you can get. Fruit also increases or fills your glycogen stores faster. So let's say if you eat potato or you eat rice or you eat beans or something like that, the digestive process of these foods take a longer time. Okay. The fruit digests much quicker. Fruit also gives you a greater insulin spike. Okay, so this gives you a strong signal for your body to engage in the building of lean mass. Okay. Fruit is very potent when it comes to leveraging insulin effectively. And I'm going to get into insulin. I'm just covering the metabolic part first, right? Now, fruit is also significantly rich in your manganese, your magnesium, your copper, your potassium, right? Things like this. Your fruits are very rich in copper, vitamin C, things like this, as well as your B vitamins. And all of these things really turbocharge your mitochondrial function. And mitochondria essentially is the energy producing factories of your cells. It's an energy producing organelle of your cells. In the human body, we have organs, and then inside the cells, we call those organs organelles, right? That is the difference in the language there. So mitochondria essentially is the organ, the energy producing organ of your cells, the powerhouse of your cells. And so when you have an abundance of these electrolytes, when you have an abundance of things like copper, when you have an abundance of vitamin C and things like this significantly improves the mitochondrial function of your cells. The reason why this is important is because basically what your body does is it takes that glucose, stores it inside your cells as glycogen, and that glycogen is then gradually converted into something called ATP, okay, which is adenosine triphosphate. This is an energy molecule that your body uses in order to power the cell. So for example, ATP is needed for muscular contractions. You can't really get muscular contractions without the ATP, okay? When you run out of ATP, you know it because this causes mechanical failure in a muscle. So, for example, if you're doing bicep curls, as you do bicep curls, the more of them you do, the more ATP you expend. And then eventually you expend enough of that ATP to the point where you can no longer do the bicep curls. So you reach mechanical failure and then you have to end the set. Okay. If you insist on pushing the muscle as hard as possible, this is where you're going to run out of ATP and then lead to more damage of the muscle tissue, more muscle damage, right? The actual tearing of the muscle fibers. Because the muscle loses the structural integrity that the glycogen provided in order for the muscle to be more resistant to the damage. If you don't adequately fill the glycogen stores in your muscle tissue, the muscle is going to be more predisposed to damage. And the more damage you take on in the muscle, the harder it is to grow that muscle and recover it enough to really get any kind of real growth out of it. So less carbs means less glycogen. Less glycogen means less ATP. Less ATP means less training performance and less muscle growth and recovery. Right? So this is the reason why carbohydrates are so important. Now, shifting over to insulin. When you have a diet that is dominant in carbohydrates, we're talking around like anywhere from at least 50% carbs, but roughly on average, a good goal is to get somewhere around 65%, 65 to 70% carbs, right? And having a nutrient goal like that in your diet pretty much is a way of guaranteeing you're going to have adequate glycogen stores inside the muscle tissue. This is also a way of guaranteeing that you will get increases in insulin sensitivity, means your body becomes hyper responsive to insulin. Your cells become hyper responsive to the insulin. The reason why this is important is because insulin is a hormone that acts as a transportation mechanism to shuttle glucose inside your cells to store it as glycogen so that it can be used. If your cells are resistant to that insulin, then the insulin cannot shuttle the glucose to the cells because the cells are not responding to the insulin. Basically, your cells can just ignore the insulin, therefore not take up the glucose needed. And this is very dangerous because if your cells are unresponsive to the insulin, then your cells cannot receive the glucose and therefore cannot utilize that glucose. This is going to lead to more cellular death and erosion of those cells. Right, so insulin resistance leads to more body fat gain, more body fat retention. It makes it difficult to build muscle mass and all this type of stuff. So this puts you in a perpetually catabolic state, which is one of the primary mechanisms for metabolic dysfunction and chronic illness. Okay, now insulin resistance happens on a spectrum, and the longer you retain the insulin resistance, the worse it gets. All right, so it's very important to actively push back against that insulin resistance and flip that to insulin sensitivity. So there are micronutrients like copper, like potassium, like magnesium, like manganese and vitamin C, vitamin B1, B2, right? Thiamine and riboflavin, B5, B6, right? Pantothenic acid, things like this. These type of nutrients work together to improve insulin sensitivity. And you get these things in spades when it comes to fruit. Adequate levels of hydration also improve insulin sensitivity. All right. The insulin sensitivity, as that improves, this is where you can really start to unlock some real muscle mass growth, lean gains. Insulin sensitivity pretty much allows you to retain an anabolic state more effectively over more of a prolonged period of time. Okay. Because what happens is if your body's not taking up the glucose, if your lean mass is not taking up that glucose, then basically your body has to either park it inside your fat cells or excrete it through your urine. It's got to get rid of it somehow, right? But if you're more insulin sensitive, well, now you have a greater capacity to eat more of those carbohydrates because now it's being utilized effectively. So you get more adequate glycogen stores and you get more fuel to your brain. Okay. Yesterday, I had the luxury of really fueling up my brain very well. Okay. Yesterday was a very carb heavy day. Lots of fruit, lots of food. Okay. I slept so hard. I had all type of dreams. I was having conversations. I was eating food in my dreams. I was running around doing all kind of stuff. Man, it was crazy. I felt like I was awake all night. I was an ER nurse in my sleep for some reason. I don't know what that was about. I don't know if I was an ER nurse or a doctor or something like that, but it was crazy. I don't know. I was seeing patients and all types of stuff in my sleep. I don't know what that was about. But I slept really well. And y'all probably notice because when I don't sleep very well, I got like these little verbal tics. I may say right a little too much. I may be mixing up my words, things like that. It shows up in my speech patterns if I slept well or not. Right? So we're doing pretty well this morning. So primarily the reason why the insulin is so important is because the insulin is the mechanism that really is the inception of your body's ability to engage in an anabolic state to build muscle mass in the first place. Number two, insulin basically is like a green light for muscle growth. It basically gives your body the green light. Okay, it's time to build muscle mass. When you have a strong insulin response, like let's say, for example, if you eat a ton of fruit, you get a strong insulin response, right? Because you get a strong blood sugar spike. Fruit does give you a pretty strong blood sugar spike when you eat fruit, okay? Especially if you eat fruits that are higher in the glycemic index, right? You get a pretty sharp uptick in your blood sugar. The common consensus in the fitness world or the weight loss world is, oh, you want to avoid blood sugar spikes. That's not really particularly true. Blood sugar spikes are actually highly beneficial because of the hormonal implications. You shouldn't really avoid blood sugar spikes. The problem is when you get a blood sugar spike and your blood sugar doesn't come back down. That's the problem. It's not just simply the spike. Interestingly enough, what happens is the fruit consumption gives you a pretty intense blood sugar spike, and then your blood sugar comes down pretty quickly after that, because of the insulin sensitivity the fruit creates. It's just potent. It's a powerful signaler. This is why, like, if you're a bodybuilder or something like this, and you eat an abundance of fruit before you train, your training performance is significantly increased after that. All right. So you'll have guys who know about this, and they'll be eating a banana or a couple kiwis or something like this in the locker room before they work out. I've seen this. And then you have others, they'll eat like Jolly Ranchers or Twizzlers or something like this before workout. I've seen this stuff. Because the bodybuilding world already knows the power of sugar in your diet when it comes to training performance and muscle growth. This has been a thing we've known for a long time. And this is why if you look at like weight gain powders, right? These weight gain protein shakes, the weight gain protein shakes, the mass gainer protein shakes are mostly sugar. All right. Yeah, bodybuilders will drink maltodextrin. They'll supplement with maltodextrin, which is basically just starchy carbs. So this has been a thing that the bodybuilding community is known for a really long time. So all this stuff about avoiding carbs and cutting sugar out and all of that type of stuff, first of all, that runs contrary to what the world's greatest and most effective bodybuilders already know. This is not new. Everybody already knows if you are serious about building lean mass, carbohydrates take center stage. The thing you increase the most is going to be your carbohydrates. Okay. You only really need to increase protein intake because you severely cut the amount of food you're eating. So therefore you have to compensate with increasing protein intake. That's the general logic behind that. But if you're well fed, you don't need to really substantially increase protein intake. You need to increase carbs. So basically, the insulin, scientifically what this does is insulin triggers an activation of mTOR, right? mTOR basically is a metabolic process that happens in your body that triggers the growth of cells. It causes cellular hypertrophy, particularly in regards to lean mass. Okay. Now, protein consumption also triggers mTOR, right? But carbohydrates gives a bit more of a powerful effect on it. Okay. That insulin is super powerful when doing that, right? So triggering that mTOR. And if you're consuming those carbohydrates throughout the day and eating an abundance of carbohydrates, basically you really activate that mTOR pathway and sustain that stimulus for the muscle growth. And mTOR triggers something called muscle protein synthesis. Okay. So doing that causes your body to more effectively utilize the protein you do consume. All right. Now, for the fellas, this is going to be really interesting because insulin also is a green light for your body to increase testosterone production. All right. Not only does insulin trigger an increase in testosterone production, insulin triggers an increase in growth hormone in general. Right? So when we talk about, like, for example, IGF-1, right? Insulin-like growth factor 1. Right? That's what that's called. Basically, insulin essentially is a growth hormone, right? In a variety of different ways. But it basically gives your body a green light to engage in these metabolic and hormonal processes that trigger the growth we want. Denser bones, larger, thicker, stronger muscles, right? Insulin also helps with vasodilation. All right. Now, it does this in conjunction with carbohydrates, but it also leads towards maintaining and improving elasticity of your vascular tissues and increasing oxygen absorption. All right. So that insulin leads to a greater pump, right? This is what's called in the bodybuilding world, right? So when you adequately leverage insulin with that carbohydrate consumption, you get major vasodilation, right? It gets some veins popping. And so more vasodilation leads to more blood flow, which means more nutrient delivery to the muscle tissue, which means protection of the muscle tissue and creating an anabolic state within the muscle tissue and providing a consistent, healthy level of oxygen to the muscle tissue in order to sustain the training safely and effectively. That's why that blood flow is so important. And of course, along with that, you get greater levels of hydration. So now, when you combine that insulin with the effect that it has on your vascular system, and you pair that with fruits that are, for example, very high in things like vitamin C, and in some cases, malic acid, vitamin C is extremely important for the production of something called nitric oxide, which is needed in order to get vasodilation. So when you have an abundance of vitamin C in your diet from this fruit consumption, you get some major vasodilation because you get an increase in this nitric oxide production. All right. And so when you start training, especially, the inner layer, which is known as the endothelial layer of your vascular tissues, releases that nitric oxide, and then and that's where you get that vasodilation. The carbohydrate consumption triggers that before you even start training. So you get two things that cause an increase in the vasodilation. The food, right, the carbohydrates and the nutrients therein, as well as the training stimulus. And that's how you get like a gnarly pump, as they say in the bodybuilding community. Going back to testosterone, because testosterone exists in kind of two main ways: total testosterone and free testosterone. Insulin leads to greater free testosterone. As you become more insulin sensitive and you leverage that insulin within the foods that you eat, that triggers a reduction in sex hormone binding globulin, right? SHBG for short. Okay. So the insulin sends a signal to your liver to reduce that sex hormone binding globulin. And this is a big part of like the whole mTOR thing and the increase in testosterone and all of this type of stuff, right? So this is a whole process that goes between your hypothalamus, your pituitary, your adrenal glands, your thyroid and liver. Is this whole feedback loop, right? And then of course to the gonads, right? And so you get greater levels of motivation, greater levels of mental focus, and of course you get greater levels of muscle growth and recovery, and of course better sleep and all this type of stuff, right? Insulin's really powerful in that way. And this is really important too, and this is important for women also, especially so because women, you don't really have testes that generate your testosterone. You pretty much get your testosterone from your adrenal glands as a woman. Right? So this is also relevant and important for women also. So this is all of the different ways that your body leverages insulin to produce these muscle growth outcomes. Now we got to get into the diet structure, right? Let's talk a little bit about the diet structure and what that looks like in a diet plan. So basically we have a diet plan here that I've laid out. So this is 1, 2, 3, and 4 meals, coming out to a total of 2,559 calories. Okay. So this is going to be in a slight surplus over the 2444 that I've been burning lately. The protein intake is 87 grams of protein a day, carbs is 474, and the fat is 54.7. All right. So basically, if we scroll down here, we pretty much covered all of our macros. We're a little bit short on the vitamin A for the beta carotene, but that's fine. Can make up for that on another day. The calcium, we're a little short, 93%, but not really too worried about that. All right, we got a full amino acid profile here. And this is without any protein powders or anything like that. You can use a protein powder if you want. I'm not really against protein powders necessarily, right? But in most cases, they're not really necessary. Okay, it's more of a matter of convenience why you would use something like that. But food first, right? Food first. Okay. So the first 3 meals are basically just all fruit, and then the last meal is more of a savory meal. Now, this is more of like a modular strategy, because if you want to shrink your, let's say, you don't need 400, nearly 500 grams of carbs, you can remove one of these fruit meals to basically just have less of the carbs. Okay. But this is more so fitted for me personally. All right. All right. So basically, we got a pound of bananas to start first thing in the morning with an ounce of cashews. Now, why do we start with the ounce of cashews? The cashews actually serve a very important purpose. So the cashews are good for the omega-6 essential fatty acids, really good source of copper. Look, just that 1 ounce of copper, that 1 ounce of cashews is 70% of our copper. Okay, and if we scroll down here to the amino acids, we got the isoleucine is 15%, leucine 12%, and then we've got valine 17%. All right, so we're chipping away at those amino acids, those branched chain amino acids. Okay, now this whole meal combined here, the bananas are really important because of the pantothenic acid and the pyridoxine. And that's really important for the synthesis of new proteins, right? That B6 is really important for that. It's a vehicle needed naturally to use with the amino acids to make the protein structures. And in this first meal alone, look at this copper, 121% of the copper for the day. It's very copper rich. The reason why that's important is because the copper is really important for the health of your blood and adequate levels of oxygen uptake. Okay, that copper is really important for blood sugar control, blood pressure control, regulating your lipid metabolism, right? So you don't have an overaccumulation of fat in your blood. Copper is really important for that. So if you're dealing with something like high blood pressure, for example, or any type of cardiovascular disease, stiffening of the arteries or anything like that, having a copper-rich diet is really important for this. Magnesium, we already got 48% of our magnesium for the day. Manganese, 61%. Right, so this is a high-powered diet here. All right. So now when we combine the bananas and the cashews together, look, isoleucine, 21%, leucine, 19%, valine, 25%. So nearly a quarter of our branched chain amino acids in that meal. So this serves as a pretty good pre-workout meal first thing in the morning or before training. Second meal, and this is beautiful here, 24 ounces of mango. So this is going to be like 3 pretty decent sized mangoes here. All right. So the mangoes in total, if you get 3 of them, it's probably going to come out to around 36 ounces of mangoes. But when you peel the mango and you remove the mango pit, that comes out to be around 24 ounces or so, right? The mango pit with the actual skin of the mango, that you're going to lose out of the 3 mangoes, you're going to lose a few ounces from that, right? So this is the way we correct for that. But of course, if you're getting mango chunks or something like that, frozen mango that you could put in a smoothie or something like this, that's a different story, right? But the mango is a phenomenal food, and mango is pretty high on the glycemic index, right? So this is a powerful post-workout food. All right. So if we scroll down here, look at this. First of all, we got mango in combination with sunflower seed kernels. The reason why we do that is because mango and sunflower seed kernels are a significant source of vitamin E, which is really important for your reproductive organs. For men, vitamin E is an antioxidant, which goes a long way towards protecting your gonads, your testes. So if you want to have adequate levels of testosterone, having a good amount of vitamin E in your diet becomes really important, especially if you're a man over 40 years old. All right. So that's 90% of our vitamin E right there, right out the gate. And look at this vitamin C, 276%. That vitamin E is really important for collagen. That collagen that collagen is extremely important for the health of your skin, vascular tissues, and vital organs. Folate, 90% of our folate, which is extremely important for nervous system recovery and brain function. All right, this is a big deal. Then, of course, niacin. Look at that. Niacin, which is really important for adequate levels of thermogenesis and vasodilation. Niacin is actually a big bodybuilding supplement. You'll have like old school bodybuilders will actually supplement with like vitamin B3 or niacin before workouts. And then again, that B6, that pyridoxine, which is really important for protein synthesis. Okay. So even if you look, cool thing on chronometers, if you hover over the B6, for example, or any of the nutrients, it gives you a brief description of what it does. So B6, vitamin B6, also called pyridoxine or pyridoxal, is used for making amino acids and breaking them down, right? So protein regulation, right? The formation of proteins using amino acids to do so. So the metabolism of amino acids as well as the building of proteins. All right. And then again, that copper, right? 142%, really powerful stuff. This is a tremendous amount of information and it may be a bit complicated. It does require a bit of math and some familiarity with the food choice, as well as putting something together that fits more so your personal metrics and lifestyle. If you want to know more, you want to speak to me personally, you can actually do that by hitting the link in the description to book a call with me. Or you can also sign up for personal coaching, where you can get your own custom diet and training plan, as well as weekly coaching calls with me personally. And look at this, omega-3 essential fatty acids, 23%, right? So we scroll down here, isoleucine, 34%, leucine, 24%. Right, so we're pretty much hitting that 50% mark within these two meals of our branched chain amino acids for the day. Valine, 35%. Okay, so within these two meals, we already hit 50% of our branched chain amino acids for the day. Okay. The third meal, we got the grapes here. Now the grapes, I didn't pair any nuts or seeds with the grapes here. And there's a reason why I did that. It's primarily because it doesn't really factor into the calories and macros. It just don't simply need to. So if we scroll down here, the grapes are a really important source of vitamin K. Look at that, 69% of the vitamin K, 32% of the thiamine, right? That vitamin B1 and riboflavin, which are really powerful antioxidants and really important, specifically the thiamine for nervous system recovery. Okay, so the thiamine is really important for blood sugar control, blood pressure regulation, nerve repair, the protection of your nerves, your motor neurons, things like this. Okay, so this is that thiamine to protect you from all types of metabolic issues and even things like Parkinson's, right, and Alzheimer's. Extremely important stuff. And then again, the common theme here with the copper. Look at that, 80%. All right. And then tryptophan, 17%, right? So tryptophan and histidine are some real standouts as far as amino acids in the grapes. Grapes are a really powerful antioxidant food. It's a really good detox food, right? Because grapes are highly astringent, so they're really good for removing toxins and waste out of the body. The reason also why I didn't add the grapes here is because the grapes serve here as a primer for improving digestion and nutrient absorption for this fourth meal, which is the dinner. And so the dinner here, look at this. 1,033 calories, 65 grams of protein, 130 grams of carbs, and 23 grams of fat. So this is the kasha, which is basically toasted buckwheat. We got about 3 ounces of that. We got the chickpeas, 9 ounces of that. We got extra firm tofu, 8 ounces of that, or basically half of a 16-ounce block. 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast, which is a good source of your B vitamins as well as your B12. And then kale, which is a really good source of vitamin K, vitamin C, copper, things like this. And so this is going to be that powerhouse meal that is going to lead to really good sleep. All right. So you don't got to worry about waking up in the middle of the night feeling hungry from a meal like that. So look at this. This meal pretty much gives us, I mean, look at the nutrient profile on this meal. Look at this. Thiamine, 577%. Riboflavin, 553%. Niacin, 266%. Look at that. And that's largely from the nutritional yeast. Okay, so that's where you get all of those B vitamins from, is that nutritional yeast. The vitamin A should be higher on the kale, so I feel like that's not really measured out correctly, but you know, that's okay. Vitamin C, 121%. Vitamin K, 387%. That vitamin K is really important also for regulating the viscosity of your blood. Oh, so you don't have underclotting or overclotting of your blood. Okay. Vitamin K is also really important for the synthesis of white blood cells. Okay, that vitamin K is really important for maintaining a strong and responsive immune system. And omega-3 essential fatty acids, 74% comes from this meal. And look at this: calcium, 75%, copper, 216%, iron, 197%. And so the iron, the copper, and then the high level of vitamin C goes a long way towards improving ferritin and reversing anemia if that's an issue you have. And then selenium, 86%, most of that selenium coming from the tofu. All right. And then, of course, very abundant and powerful branched chain amino acid profile here. Look at this: isoleucine, 193%, leucine, 141%, valine, 160%. Okay, so this is the meal that is going to bring us all the way through the night for the next, let's say if you eat this meal 2 hours before bed and then you go to bed and sleep for 8 hours, that's a whole 10 hours that you have to go without eating. So that's why you would eat this heaviest meal before bed at night. This is a sleep quality thing. That's why I put it this way. All right. So this is more or less what a high raw vegan fruit-based or fruit-dominant diet would look like. And of course, you can modulate this and fit it according to what your personal needs are. Now, I could have added, with this grapes, I could have added an ounce of walnuts or an ounce of pumpkin seed kernels or an ounce of almonds or something like that to it. I could have, but the reason why I did is because I didn't need to add more fat to my diet, and I didn't really need to add more calories. Right? I didn't really need to add more food, right? They could have made the protein a bit higher, but marginally so, right? An ounce would probably contain somewhere along the lines of between 6 and 8 grams of protein. All right. It doesn't hurt to add it. It's just not really necessary. We already have everything we need here in this plan. And then, of course, vitamin D is the thing you primarily get from sun exposure or supplementation. Or I can add mushrooms to this last meal to get vitamin D2 to make up for the vitamin D in the diet plan there. All right. If I wanted to make up this vitamin A, I could swap out the grapes and add in cantaloupe. Okay. Or I can start the day off with the cantaloupe up here and then put the bananas down here. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. I can also add in papaya along with the mango and do a 50-50 split, and then put the grapes and citrus fruits and everything up here to make up for the vitamin A, right? So there's different combinations of foods and stuff that you can do. This is just an example of what one full day of eating would look like to adequately leverage insulin, carbs, and things like that and get enough protein. All right, I appreciate you sticking with me, and I appreciate having you in the Tribe by Noir community. We do this every week. You also get access to the High Raw Vegan Nutrition Guide, my Tribe Flex training series with body weight and resistance bands, and my Mindset and Self-Development videos series, the 3 Steps of Self-Actualization. So hit the link in the description of this video. Go ahead and get signed up, and I'll see you on the other side.